Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Safe Room featuring security side quests. My name is Tristan Watty, and I'm joined by the great, the marvelous, the mysterious, and I can think of another M word, but not right this at this moment in time. Russ.
Musty.
That's one word.
You know what? I think that right there speaks to the tone of this episode and just how ridiculous I think the two of us without adult supervision may be.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Definitely so. And we're going to see, and you're going to be witnesses how we go off the rails, especially when we get to geek out about some security knowledge and a couple of things, but not to reveal too much because, spoilers. For you first time joining us, we always like to introduce ourselves. So, Tristan Watty, I come from the area of professional services within AWS, where we help to accelerate our customers' journey to the cloud in a secure manner, fashion, and form. And I'm also joined by Russ.
And I come from the customer incident response side of things. So I hope I never have to meet you in person.
That is always the case, unless it's for appetizers or food or something along those lines.
Unless it's at a conference.
Yeah, at a conference.
Feel free
right?
to say hi.
Feel free to tell us what kind of chicken wings you like, but that's a side but
that's not even our question. You're just bringing up stuff.
Yeah,
at this point.
You know why? Because it's around lunchtime. You're just like chicken wings just popped into my head for some reason. What our normal question is: where are you tuning in? Where in the galaxy are you joining from today? And for our second question, that is going to be an interesting one. And it could be a long debate, longer than the hour that we have allotted. And it's what's your favorite RPG? Broad, ambiguous. And I throw it to Russ.
It is. And I think you did that on purpose.
Yeah.
But I think, if we got to go with favorite RPG, I think a little bit of recency bias is kind of involved, but I'm going to have to go with Witcher 3.
Nice.
I think that between the amount of content, the amount of Gwent that I played, I mean, that alone right there. But yeah, I think between all of the content and all of the like DLCs and everything, like I probably spent the most time in that game, with the exception of what would probably be my real answer, which is either Obsidian or Skyrim. But I'm gonna go with Witcher 3 because I know that's a hot debate, and I don't want to get into
it. See, it's funny because I can trump the Witcher argument really easily by just saying Final Fantasy. Done. It's the whole series.
Right.
Just the whole series. See, there's no rules. This is what happens when you don't have guardrails, folks.
Yeah, you cheat.
Final Fantasy Tactics 10. Awkward laughing, all that good stuff. What? Yeah. Feel free to put in
go
chat.
with which RPG series. That's going to be a much easier answer, I think. I'd have to agree with you if we were talking about series.
Yeah. See, and that's the funny thing is if we're talking about series, then we could go off on another tangent. But
and we would
actually have to get to some, security stuff. So feel free to continue to put that in the chat. And in the meantime, Russ will tell us, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to go a little bit into actually your favorite topic, which is threat modeling. I can't wait to kind of delve into this. But first, real quick, just going to go over what we did last week. Last week was, if you were here, last week was our container security, intro to container security. So we went over a little bit about images and configuration management, but most importantly, the thing we went over was defense in depth with containers. I think that was kind of the takeaway from our episode last week. But this week, we will move into a little bit of threat modeling. So we're going to go into some of our fundamentals on what threat modeling is, how you do it, and then we're going to let you speak a lot because this is kind of your bread and butter. But I also do have some questions for you, and I think that's probably going to be the case for the entire episode, is because it's a really good topic, and I think that you have a lot to say about that. So definitely going to rely heavily on you. And since we don't actually have our sage today, I think that actually makes you our sage, and you will be helping guide us today in our threat modeling conversation.
Yeah, and it's funny because I remember a certain movie where they come to the elder sage, right? And he has his hood on and he takes off his hood and he tells him to go away. So if you get the reference and kind of the theme of where we're going for this episode, it's going to be interesting. So, but I think too,
it'll also be pretty clear as we start talking about it and asking questions.
Where I just start saying, hey, listen, 1 second.
Yeah.
But I think to ease us into our transition and also say, hello, Victor. We would like to start off with kind of a poll. Right? I think that's a good place to start. And what poll may that be? Well, the poll is coming right about. Let me stop sharing this.
Not quite.
Oh, spoilers. You see what happened? There we go. It froze, but we sense a disturbance in the force.
Yes.
So if you also feel a disturbance in the force when it comes to, let's say, threat modeling, pick 1, 2, 3, or 4. Where do you lie within your disturbances?
I like this one. Not just because of, the awesome theme that goes with it, but just in general, I think this is a good question. I think my preference would be active scanning. That's where I would like to, find the sort of, what we're looking for out of a threat model would hopefully be through active scanning. And I like that because you specifically put active scanning as opposed to passive scanning, which I think people sometimes kind of forget that, you don't have to sit and wait for your detections to work. You can also go out and actively look for, these types of threats. So,
yeah. And I have to highlight the force is not with me. Yep. So definitely appreciate it. Keep coming in with the numbers because I think I have to definitely go for number 1, preventative controls. I think of guardrails all the time as that base foundation, right? It's kind of like making a peanut butter sandwich, right? You got to spread that peanut butter nice and thin. So what you can do is add more peanut butter. You thought I was going to say jelly, but that's not how I operate. So Jedi foresight, preventative controls, SCP policies, RCP policies, all these kind of things that it can just help organizations, because what it does is it gives you guardrails and then you can build upon that. But I think to build upon, see the segues, right, that we like to do on the show, building upon the fundamentals. But first, we have to understand what the fundamentals are, right? So what is threat modeling? So threat modeling is a structured methodology of identifying, quantifying, and addressing security risk in software and systems. Right? Nice and simple. And that could be done through analysis of components, data flows, trust boundaries, and everything in between, I would say. So when you start to break down that concept, you start to understand, okay, threat modeling encompasses all these different approaches from a structural standpoint. So when you think of proactive methodologies in order to help better safeguard your environment, you start to think of, okay, what is my attack surface? What are the potential vulnerabilities within my environment? And sometimes that's a hard thing to think about. But what you really need to do is take that step back and just, as I say, break things down to the ones and zeros. So if you were to bring things into an architecture form and shape, and you have the little boxes and the squares and the arrows and everything like that, and say, hey, this is my environment. Let's talk about this right here. And what is that? Well, sub for X. Could be a S3 bucket. It could be an EC2 instance. It could be EBS, something along those lines. Is, okay, what am I doing in relation to security for that particular item? And am I not doing anything for security with that particular item? So if we were to use S3 as an example, is it public? Is it encrypted? Is there tagging involved? Who has access? And we start to go to identity and things of that nature. You can see how it starts to kind of go off the rails a little bit, because you start to talk about all these different scenarios. I don't know if you've seen this, Russ, is when you start to see somebody threat modeling they talk about all these different use cases. Like, what happens if this person repels into the data center and takes out one hard drive, and then preparing for all those different items. So have you seen talks kind of go that way when you're talking about threat modeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a pretty common bias. Well, I wouldn't even go with bias. I think that's just more of a miss the forest for the trees type of situation where people kind of, well, I guess that would be angering bias, but people get stuck on these very specific scenarios, and then they don't really discuss the basics of like, hey, what do we do if this and this happens? And it's like, or you can just go through a generic ransomware event and kind of discuss how you would recover from that sort of thing. Be like, hey, we have a cloud specific ransomware event, what would you do?
Yeah, exactly.
And you kind of see that where people are like, well, in this case, and you're like, well, that's not really what I asked. Like in general, ransomware, you have it, your backups are gone, what do you do? And so just kind of like keeping it a little bit generic sometimes will help you kind of narrow it down to the more specific. So I think that people come in with maybe sometimes a little bit of a too fine-grained detail to kind of start off with, when you're really kind of taking big picture. Like that's what threat modeling is supposed to be, is taking that cybersecurity and then kind of really narrowing that focus down to you and your risks and what you as an organization will be facing and how you will go about either remediating those risks or or just mitigating the amount of risk that it is. So I think that people get very, very stuck in the weeds very easily and kind of miss the big picture.
Yeah.
I've seen that, I mean, time and time and again. I'm sure you've seen the same.
100%. And I think part of the process that people overlook is the threat modeling process helps to get the right people in the room. Because that's often the case of what happens is you're threat modeling almost in a silo where you don't include developers or even legal or this, because there's so many aspects to it, right? So when you start to have these threat modeling talks, when you get to the specific items that you're talking about, you already went through what you said, the basic, the fundamentals of how do we encompass the overall structure of our environment, our policies, procedures. And this is a perfect question from Pete as well, is how important is it for threat hunters to understand the AWS services, et cetera, if they rely solely on external SIEM to do threat detection? I would say it's important to know where the logs are coming from and how can you, let's say, query those logs. So if you are in an external SIEM, what kind of queries are you doing? Right? I think it helps to understand the services that you are querying to an extent. So if you think of guard duty or config or something along those lines, those items are pumping out logs into the SIEM. I think it's important from that standpoint. What do you say, Russ?
Well, I agree. I think it is important that there's at least a basic level of AWS services, because I mean, a lot of the logs are going to be based off of your API calls. And so if you don't really understand what you're calling, then how do you know whether that's a sign of maliciousness or not? So if you're threat hunting without completely understanding what it is you're looking for, you're going to be doing yourself a disservice, because you don't know what you're looking for because you don't entirely understand what you're looking at. So I think that's one of those things where you should have at least a basic level of understanding about AWS services and the difference between like delete object versus delete bucket if you're going to be looking for threat hunting.
Yeah, 100%. And this is not the data you want to move on. Appreciate that comment. And see, we're getting people with the theme in mind. And so I think there's a job for AWS to mitigate since external. That's an interesting question. If you can expand upon it a little bit. And Testo, I guess Presto or Testo Django, right? It's interesting. I'm going to say that every time I commit something. Now it's like Testo Presto.
Yeah, definitely. That's probably going to be something we steal as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we can go back to the job for AWS to mitigate. I'm not sure if that's what Victor was going for, but I think maybe this has to do with the shared responsibility model, and kind of just understanding the difference between the security of the cloud and security in the cloud. I'm not sure if that's what they were referring to, but in this case, that would be, I believe, under the shared responsibility model on the customer side, because it's not that we're discussing AWS security. You're looking for your account security on AWS.
Exactly.
So I think that there may be sometimes a little bit of confusion about that in general. But for this case, we're specifically referring to threat modeling from a perspective of your account. And so maybe AWS vulnerabilities is something that you also would consider in your threat model, because, I mean, that is your cloud service provider. So that's definitely something I think that should probably be involved in your threat model. Security is absolutely, if I can add this, security is everyone's responsibility. We definitely believe that. And that's why, Tristan, you were referring earlier to bringing the relevant stakeholders into this process, into the threat modeling, because security isn't responsible for everything, every piece of security. Sometimes you have to offload that to developers, and to everyone has to kind of take a part in security, for sure.
Exactly. And it's exactly that, because sometimes you may not even think of all the stakeholders off the top of your head. So I know when you do tabletop exercise, that gives a chance to bring everybody in a room, but I think the same process should be shared, as I was mentioning earlier, when it comes to threat modeling and setting up that dedicated time to talk about, hey, if, like you said, ransomware happens within the environment, okay, what are the different items, the systems, the resources, what is affected, and then what are the notifications that have to go out, right? All those different items. And I think part of, when it comes to implementation challenges, if we go over that topic for a second, I think part of it is just, what is our strategy? How do we build the expertise and the capabilities when it comes to threat modeling, and how do we scale it throughout our organization? So it's not just a siloed, sage Russ that knows how to, threat model everything under the sun, but it's the security team and the platform team and everybody, in between. And then by understanding those challenges, then you can start to move towards, let's say, strategic implementations. So you can do risk-based of, okay, what is the application prioritization? So do you have a framework for determining which application should undergo, let's say, a more comprehensive threat modeling, first base, data sensitive, things of that nature, and then get to the second or third or fourth choices after, right? What is the priority order? And then what automation and tools that you can implement, and how can you remediate through a workflow, and then how you can continuously evolve. I think all of those steps are a bunch of different items that you need to start to look at when you're asking the question, okay, how do I threat model, and what is threat modeling? So we said, go ahead, Russ.
Actually, so I think that as we're discussing implementation, it's kind of a good time for me to ask my question, which is like, why has threat modeling become a bit of a buzzword? And can you just explain, I guess, why it's not just a buzzword and it's like an important process that needs to be followed?
Yeah.
I'm thinking from like a, when everyone says zero trust, but they don't really mean zero trust, like, from that perspective, like threat modeling.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because it's one of those things of, people often think of it as a quick checkbox, where it's really not. It's something that should be baked into every one of your process and procedures, right? That's where that structural approach comes from, because you want to actively identify potential security threats and vulnerabilities within the environment. And one of the different pieces that comes into that is understanding, one, what is our target state security strategy? I mentioned this a lot, because why? It says, what are we moving towards? What is our current, maturity level? Are we in that crawl, walk, or run phase? And then from there, let's start to build out the processes and procedures that test these different items to say, okay, we're in this phase. And threat modeling is one of those aspects that should be baked into the process because, hey, do you have a systematic approach for evaluating AWS architectures and giving a perspective when it comes to security? Do you understand the shared responsibility model? And I think that's where it starts to say, oh, it's on the checklist, but we don't have any policies and procedures around it. So I think that's where we start to understand the process. And I hope we get some AWS Legos today. Maybe we might get a couple. So I think that's some of the foundational elements that go into it because it runs through everything, really, right? Can you quickly identify an asset within your organization? And that goes to tagging, right? So do you have a tagging structure in place to say, hey, the data bucket that says do not delete, why does it say do not delete? Does it have a tag on that? Or you probably see that before. It's like very important bucket, don't delete, right? And meanwhile,
you're like, yeah, what for?
Yeah, and it's something very important that organizations have to consider. So I think taking a step back to answering the question of what is threat modeling, I think we talked about it. It's taking a structural approach to understand, hey, what are the vulnerabilities within my organization? And having processes and procedures around that. And then the step after that is identifying, okay, what methodology do you start to go down? Because you can go to Stride, you can go to Pasta, you can go to MITRE ATT&CK. Right? All these different items start to pop up. And for instance, when you go to Stride, where you have spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. I think I got all of it. All right. So
it was good. I wouldn't have been able to pull those up off the top of my head.
The acronyms.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
That's the one thing is if you get into security, you're going to need to know a lot of acronyms. So
yes,
when you start to think about this, I think part of it is when you break down each one of those steps is spoofing. Can an unauthorized, let's say, compromised IAM credential access something that it's not supposed to? Right. So these are all pieces of the puzzle that you have to consider. And then I know a lot of organizations, environments, they kind of like, ooh, we have to do assessment. Well, it's like that, oh, assessment. But it's more of just a review, right? So you can do the assessment a little bit easier because when you review your architecture, your structures, things of that nature, and their integrations, that's another thing. Because to the earlier point of, hey, I'm using an external SIM. Okay. How are you using that external SIM within your environment? Is it doing analytics? Is it doing, let's say, if you have logs, is it doing curation of the logs in order to prioritize events coming out of whatever data source? So if you have a centralized, let's say, S3 bucket where all of your CloudTrail and VPC full of logs, things of that nature go to, and then that goes into the SIM, okay, how is it handling all those events? Do you have rules set up? Things along those lines. So those are all pieces of the puzzle. And when you start to go down that route, you start to ask the right questions of, okay, how is this really integrated? And this is another secret is how you get optimizations in your environment, because oftentimes tools are added at different points in time and some tools overlap. And when tools overlap, you know what happens is there's a chance for it not to overlap as well because, oh, that other tool is it's doing that. That tool is doing that. That tool is doing that. And then when you look, it's just a big kind of gap. So pieces of the puzzle. And these are challenges that we see our customers faces all the time. What?
Absolutely.
From that lens, what are your thoughts, Russ, when it comes to kind of leveraging some automation or tools or what is the real world implementation items that you've seen from your side?
Yeah, so I mean, well, to be fair, based off of that, I mean, based off of threat modeling, I mean, I've seen all sorts of different processes implemented. If we're talking about specifically like the strategies, I found, like you were saying, your stride frameworks and different approaches. My favorite, personally, as an incident responder, is the lucky approach, and just like really hoping for the best. And so, I appreciate that as someone who prefers job security. But realistically, this the sort of thing that I like to see is that really it's done at all, and done from a real business risk perspective. Because when you get down to it, cybersecurity is just a part of the business. You have to secure your data, and so outside of IT, do you do risk assessments on parts of your business? Of course. You have to look at the risk if what happens when a client doesn't pay their bill or whatever. You're taking those things into account when you build your processes. So it's the same process here, where you're doing that in a methodical, systemic approach. So that way, hey, you know what? We're trying to design our security architecture. Let's really sit down with everyone and build it out in a step-by-step approach, so that way we're not just relying on memory or expertise. These are systemic mechanisms to allow you to be like, hey, what do we do in this situation? Let's look it up. Who do we contact in this situation? Let's look it up. It's the same reason I say every single time when I sign off, please create an incident response plan, because you have to have, before things go wrong, you want to have a plan of who you're going to communicate with, who the relevant stakeholders with. You don't want managers, CEOs, CISOs, over your shoulder during an incident, right? The same thing in threat modeling. You want to bake these processes in from the beginning, so that way when things do go wrong, or preferably things go right, and you are taking the preventative actions that need to be taken before there's an incident. So I think just in general, people do tend to think of these buzzwords sometimes a little bit more complex than they need to be. No, I don't think that the new AI chatbots are gonna help you, but
Yeah, and I just think that's it's
Right,
interesting because it's exactly that. And when it comes to the AI side, we always talk about human in the loop and things of that nature based on your maturity level and those items. But I think the process of threat modeling is unique to the aspect of you still want to review these items with the different stakeholders. You can have automation and tools build out like a threat, but you want to understand, okay, is there anything we're missing from the different stakeholders and getting them involved and things of that nature? And as I go through, cost-effective options. And then, Russ, what process are you starting to see that leverage AI? Another interesting.
That is a good question. So I haven't seen a lot of, let's say, like AI specific processes, but there are definitely cases where you see maybe some of these scripts that are running, that you can kind of tell aren't just a script written by a threat actor. But I think a lot of the AI in general is being used in more of the research of attacks than actually the attacks themselves. I actually just read a pretty interesting article about somebody using AI to replicate the release of information about a vulnerability. So they basically said, okay, here's this vulnerability, and then the research company did not provide any sort of scripts or here's how to do the attack. But based off of the screenshot that they provided, which was very minimal, like scripting in like just a terminal, and so they were able to use that and give the AI a little bit more information about the CVE, and they were basically able to use different models in order to build say get a better understanding of say the difference between the code that had been released and the new patch. And so they were able to use AI, because you're not going to go through that many lines of code automatic or manually. So they used AI to find the delta, to find the change, and then were able to use I think it was a different model to actually build the code to exploit that vulnerability based off of just a social media post. So I think you're going to find a lot more examples of people using AI to research or to provide that information about vulnerabilities or like OSINT reconnaissance. I think you're going to find a lot more of AI in that, rather than AI driving these attacks. You know what I mean? Because I think that level of human is still necessary. And I think that, especially right now, because there's not a lot of intermodal connectivity, I think that right now it's really going to be used as more of an assistant and helper to maximize the, I mean, to be fair, threat actors are also businesses. So they're also going to use AI to maximize their human output. And so I think that that's something, you know, a little bit of aside from threat modeling, but also AI is, you know, constantly evolving. And that's something that, you know, is a good example of why your threat model needs to be constantly evolving, because right now we're seeing research being done with AI. Is the next step actually full blown, like every single step of, you know, MITRE or every in the cyber attack kill chain? Like, are we going to see start to finish AI? I don't know, probably. I don't think we're there right now. I'm sure there may be some more advanced state actors that do have some sort of capability. Obviously, I don't know that, but I think that you're definitely going to see more AI being leveraged in attacks. Maybe just not the way that people predict, with that blue AI versus red AI battling. Like, I don't think we're going to see quite that, but we're definitely already seeing signs of AI use and AI maximizing the efficiency of threat actors. So
Yeah.
a little bit of a long answer to your question, but it's a good question. So I think it did deserve a couple extra seconds to kind of explain that out.
Yeah, and it's definitely interesting from that standpoint. Is AI is my assistant. I think I brought up that comment because it's the truth is you are working hand in hand with the processes and procedures, right? If you think of threat modeling as a whole of, hey, I want to gather some information about how I can better protect my environment. Okay, you can leverage different AI tools and things of that nature. And someone also mentioned developer can shift left with security scans and Q developer to try and mitigate as far left as possible, which is a great comment, because what I was going to say is the tool set, right? You think of how guard duty has evolved over the years. You think of how even Amazon Q has developed over the years, or something like Detective, where you're able to do investigations with groups and things of that nature, right? Taking that and putting it into your threat modeling practices, it will be interesting, right? Because now you're starting to get to that next layer of, okay, how do I go from the crawl phase to the walk phase to the run phase, and all these different items of how you're leveraging the different tool sets along with your process and procedures and your future goals is all a big part of it. Another big part is also trying to understand our next poll, right? So what your security council strategy is. And I think it plays right perfect into
It
that.
really does.
So feel free to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the chat, right? Because if I had to pick this one, I think, I don't know if I'm just still a Jedi council member. The methodicals, the stride framework, and that approach. That's definitely one piece I would go to. What about you, Russ?
Definitely. Personally, I think that realistically, as long as you're using one of these methods and have a defined approach, I think that's great. Realistically, I think anything but for the smuggler's luck is a very good approach to threat modeling, so long as there is an approach. I just really want people to understand that smuggler's luck doesn't exist. I mean, just look at Han. Dude got wrapped up in carbonite. So don't rely on luck. Please have some sort of workflow or mechanism, including with threat modeling. Don't rely on, obfuscation or they're never going to find me type of mentality. Please don't do that, because realistically, if you don't have the basics down and you don't have a systemic approach, they probably will find you, because you're going to forget something if you're not really working through a process and really, there's no need, I guess, to reinvent the wheel when these methodologies and these frameworks exist. And I think that is something that maybe gets lost in the conversation is you don't have to create this whole model on your own. I know it's very contextualized and a lot of that information is going to come from your organization, but there's resources out there to help you do threat modeling. It's not just like, hey, congratulations, you're our first hire security engineer, make us a threat model. So I think kind of bringing those frameworks and these approaches down to a reasonable level for your organization. I think that's going to be kind of your best bet. So a long answer to say anything but 4.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I think Pete brings it up as well, is lots of organizations do not have the AWS maturity level to do the basic security. And it's funny because there's probably that one security engineer that got hired. To your point, it's like, wait, I'm doing that right now. And I think that's the important part to also speak about as we're kind of like talking through all these different items of the smuggler's luck is, hey, I'm only one person. I have to run and do threat models and do it. Actually bring it up. I'm quarterback and receiver and doing all these items. And I think it's an interesting thing because if you leverage threat modeling, I think that helps to bring a lot of stakeholders to the table. I keep saying that for the reason because it opens up conversations to say, hey, we took a look at this application and there's vulnerabilities here, 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 and here because of X. We can close it out in 24 months or we can close it out in 2 weeks, depending on what tools we have and the budget that goes behind it and how fast we can provision stuff. So those are interesting conversations to have. So if you're that one person out there, I think having that is one of the keys that you can use.
Definitely. I think actually, I don't want to spoil it because I think you'll be referencing this in your homework. Wow, words are just not a strong suit for me today.
I told you we're going off the rails today. That's what we're doing.
We really are. So our knowledge quest is what I was referring to. I believe we'll actually bring this up later, but part of the threat approach that AWS recommends is doing a persona type of approach. So when you are threat modeling, there should be someone there who is a business or executive persona, and then you have your developer, then you have your red and blue team, and AppSec, and you try to get the right people in the room to be able to have full buy-in. Like risk is definitely a part of business. That's something that whether or not you're in IT or security, you'll understand. Like there's just a risk associated with business. So I think that really ensuring that those people, are in the room and actually contributing to that conversation, like you said, is half the battle right there. You're saying, hey, I don't know, in this scenario, what would we do? And that's usually not the, say, founding security engineers answer. That's the developer's answer or the developer persona. And so it can be quite difficult. But like we mentioned earlier, security is not just security's job. You have to get those stakeholders involved, or are you really threat modeling, or are you just coming up with some fancy playbooks for your security team? I think there's a difference there, and that's kind of I think part of that difference right there. It's just not including those stakeholders that really should be there.
Yeah, and I think because we're talking about these different components, especially when it comes to just, hey, where do I go? I think we can kind of skip around a bit, right? Because I think knowledge is a big part. And since we have this theme going on, let's jump right into the knowledge quest, right? So if you are trying to be a force multiplier, right, the knowledge quest is essentially what it boils down to is, hey, what pieces of information can I read about, take part in, or tell certain, hosts about via the favorite social media of your choice that you like or subscribe, especially on YouTube and Twitch. Hey, I did this kind of thing when it comes to threat modeling. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that I, for one, am a Padawan in training. I'm an L100. So I'm trying to figure out this thing called threat modeling. So as I'm starting to go down this route, what I want to do is start to think about, hey, what pieces of information can I grab and can I just continue to explore? And the first place to start, I would say, is the security pillar, the well-architected framework. So it's a good place to start because, hey, what's in there? One, topics about operational reliability, performance. I skipped over one particular, security, because we want to delve into security because we have a security bias. But this is one piece of the puzzle that you can go down and just say, hey, what is some foundational information? Like the shared responsibility model. What is that? When it comes to threat modeling, it's a very important part of the puzzle. So take a read of the security pillar. And then if you want some continued learning, why not just say, hey, what are the different use cases out there? Let me see what the actual security documentation is when it comes to key management or security S3 and the different training pieces out there. How can I continue my path down? I wanted to say the Padawan path, but eventually you want to be a, Jedi or a knight or something. But I digress, because if you wanted to, let's say, level up a bit and go to that next level and become a threat modeling knight, see what I did there, is, hey, what is the reference architecture? And Russ, you're looking at this. How hard is the reference architecture to understand?
Not. But it looks like there's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's one of those things where you look at it like, oh, I'm supposed to do all of this? Well, this helps you to give you some prescriptive guidance around what your organizational target state security strategy can look like. So when it comes to leveraging accounts within your environment, how do you set it up? You talked about external SIM. Okay, does that sit somewhere around here? Or what other tools do you consider from, let's say, AWS native tooling perspective? Not to be biased, but what can you use in terms of security hub, guard duty, config? How do you audit using Audit Manager? And everybody who uses Audit Manager, give a shout out in the chat. But all these things help you to break down piece by piece. So when you look at, the overarching picture of, hey, what's the value of using this? That's exactly it. Is, hey, I'm doing a threat model to see if I have the right pieces in play. And that's where SRA starts to come into play, especially if you want to go down understanding some of AI, ML, and a bunch of other things we could go off on tangents for. But I think the next piece that you would like to dive into is, how do you organize your environment? And this is one of the challenges that customers have as they start to grow and continue to grow, because there's so many factors that come in of, okay, I have this business unit and I may have acquired this other business unit. Who has the account and who's doing what? And this is why I always go to the preventive SCPs and RCPs and things of that nature. But these are all conversational items that need to be had and strategized. And this is where threat modeling also comes in. Why? Because if you have multiple accounts, who is responsible for all of those accounts? when it comes to the logs getting pushed from those accounts, from the identity aspects of all of those accounts, because your security personnel may be relying on a manager or somebody along those lines to say, okay, give this person access into this account. All right. Depending on your maturity level, there's different ways to answer that question. Because do you have just-in-time access? What kind of mechanisms do you have for temporary creds? So questions that come about. And I think reading about some of the core concepts that go into AWS organizations, for example, starting to leverage something like control tower. I like when somebody's viewing ahead, like running, like a running back or, wide receiver. And then yep, thank you for that. So,
I mean, if we're going to go on theme, I like to see using the force to see clarify the future.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I was going to go like this for the force, but then I was just like, that goes in other mediums. Because I can't use the Darth Vader, you can't use that. So if you start to think about that, yeah, exactly. That would be a clip tomorrow. But when you start to understand, hey, I'm building up, I'm a threat modeling knight, then I become security high council defender. A lot of words. But what it means is you start to go into the command line. You start to do the infrastructure as code. You start to see, hey, I read about the SRA. Now these are the different components of how to actually build out. Okay, control tower. Are we using CloudFormation to automate this process? And how do I do it to make sure that every account that gets spun up in the environment has the same set of controls? And this is part of threat modeling. You may ask why. Well, that's also one of the 4 questions when it comes to threat modeling. What are we building? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job? And asking those questions is a big part of, testing and learning and building and starting to say, hey, this is how our organization is going to evolve over time. Because the other pieces of this is people, it's funny. There's a particular quote from a Leonard Snart that says, you create the plan, you execute the plan goes off the rails, you throw away the plan. But you don't want to do that. You want to figure out, hey, what are we building? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good enough job? So how do more with less code? So
pretty much.
Yeah, it's going along those lines. And if you don't want to jump in right away, you can do some workshops. These are more of a guided approach to understanding, hey, threat modeling. How do we do these kind of items? How do we figure out what to do? All right, let me do a workshop that says guard duty. Let me go over the overview. Hey, what is the finding? Protection plans, malware protections. Part of the TDIR workshop, going down all these different items, and what you'll start to piece together is saying, hey, I know a little bit more about guard duty today. And I'm looking at my architectural diagram and I'm not picking up stuff properly. Now you start to build it out. You start to document, you use your framework. So all good pieces of the puzzle. And I know it's daunting to look at a lot of these, but it's also a fun ride to go down and trying to understand what's going on. So how many workshops and do you think you've completed in your lifetime, Russ?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've done quite a few, especially because, to be fair, the customer incident response team does have, I think, 4 or 5 of our own workshops. So I have done quite a few workshops. But I like workshops because it's not just AWS saying like, hey, go read the manual. Like, it doesn't feel like that. It's like, hey, go read the manual or watch this video or go do this workshop. Like, because I mean, that's what we're here to do, right? Is learn how to utilize AWS to best protect our organizations. So how do you do that? Well, it's your preference, right? And different people learn different ways. So Does it have to be just reading, the SRA documentation? No. It should be used as at least like a reference guide, but your primary information doesn't necessarily have to be documentation, because we do try to provide more than just documentation, which can be very boring to read and people don't do it. So there's tons of information and we're shooting a lot of it at you all at once, but as much as possible, it's not to say just go read the manual or whatever. It's because there's good information in there and it should be used as a reference book, guide, whatever. It's a reference document, but also we have workshops, so you can actually try to do this and put this in practice in a safer, more sterile environment than maybe your organization's account. And so there is different ways to do that, and there is videos out there, tons of videos, not just AWS sourced, that gives a lot of information about this not just threat modeling, but AWS security in general. So if reading documentation isn't your thing, well, first off, you should probably learn to like it, but two, go look at YouTube videos, go look at the workshops, go and play around with the services. Like, the best way, in my opinion, for me personally to learn is by going and messing things up and being like, oh, you know what? I see what I should have done. And then I go reference the handbook or not the handbook, but documentation and be like, I was right. I should have done it this way. And so it's kind of like pick your poison, really. There's lots of resources out there, lots of information. So kind of a little bit, go read the manual. But I don't want that to be our first suggestion, but there is a lot of information out there.
Yeah, and I think you make a lot of great points. Is there's so much information out there, and that's why I think when it comes to the concept in that title, threat modeling, you start to say, oh, where do I start? And I think it's asking those questions, the 4 questions of what are we building? What are we trying to do in our everyday? And I think by starting to do that, you start to say, okay, what is the diagram? What are the resources? Where do we want to have these resources? What region? Right? Who's going to access data classification? By asking the simple question of what are we building, you start to go in a layered approach. So when you're starting to think about it, try not to think or overthink when it comes to threat modeling. Just take a structured approach, right? And that might also be in the definition, but I didn't just subliminally plant that in there. So as you start to go through and understand, you start to have a lot of fun jokes like go read the manual and love the SRA and all these great things, right? So
exactly.
I think for part of the show, we should start just talking backwards, right? See how much we get there. But we also have to take a step back every once in a while and kind of think about it. Because I know we were going to go on a couple of side quests, but I think I want to take the last couple minutes we have just to really hone in on the point of threat modeling is a team activity. You can gamify it. You can use game-like scenarios to help foster, I would say, a great sense of community. But it also helps to foster everybody and I would say kind of shuffle everybody into the right room. Because if you have, let's say, security teams competing to find the most significant vulnerabilities in a sample environment, you start to build up that muscle memory. And you start to say, hey, when I look at a diagram, I just see through the diagram now. I can see behind it. And that's something that's built up over time. And when you ask the question of, hey, what threat modeling approach speaks to your soul, it's usually one that's developed through these different activities. Right? It's like, all right, I'm going to, let's say, the gym. I do a particular set of exercises every day. When it comes to threat modeling, it's the same type of feel and pattern that you have to go through of just continuing to work out that muscle of, okay, I know what questions to ask. I know somewhat of the services and how to approach those services. So let's just think about it that way. So
that does bring up a really good point that I think that sometimes is overlooked, is that threat modeling is not supposed to be a mark on your security team and attempting to punish people for not doing things the right way. Like, if that's what you're using threat modeling for, then go away. Just go away. Threat modeling is not at all. It's not just a check mark on the list of things to do. It's not just it's not supposed to be an evaluation, except for internally. You're evaluating yourself and your processes. So yeah, you will probably find areas where you can grow or things that you could be doing better. But take that as a learning experience and not just to blame security. Yes, documentation is your best friend. And yeah, threat modeling is an educational opportunity. It's so that way your organization grows, which is never a comfortable experience. They say get out of your comfort zone in order to find growth. You have to do that as an organization as well. And so, yeah, it's not comfortable sometimes addressing, hey, we've been doing things in a way that are less than ideal. But that's how you become better, is by finding those and being like, well, you know what, if we look at this critically, then maybe there's X, Y, or Z. And again, it shouldn't be a critique on you and what you're doing in an organization. It's really because, hey, we found this process to find better methods of protecting ourselves from risk. Let's do this. Because that realistically, that's what it comes down to. Security is decreasing risk as much as possible. And so if we find new and better ways to do that, then we should absolutely pivot and do that. Just like a little thing, that I think people sometimes forget. It's not supposed to be a self-critical process. It's supposed to be critiquing your security as an organization and your processes. Or not necessarily critiquing, but actually coming up with them and writing them down and having a systemic approach to do this. So I think that's something that doesn't get brought up enough. Like, you're not supposed to use it as a way to get in trouble. It's really supposed to be like a method.
Yeah. To gauge the maturity level where you are, right? It's kind of like pulling up your stat screen in any video game. It's like, okay, what am I right now? And I think that's part of it. Also, that is top priority. So if we take that step back and think about that, is we always like to say that because it's for the reason. It's baked into all pieces of the process. And threat modeling is that tool that you help to, I would say, that helps you to kind of bring to the forefront, like, hey, we want to get towards this state. These are the different things we have recognized in our processes, in our procedures, in our tool sets that we can improve, but we need to do X. So I think that's a very important part to consider and think about. And also, Pete, thank you for contributing and having all these different insights, as well as everybody else in chat. I know we didn't go on a side quest today, but I think we're going to have a follow-up on this topic because we went into the weeds a little bit, and I think we need to delve a little bit deeper, and side quests may help. But I think one other thing that may help is, one, every Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific
Same day,
Standard
same time.
Yep. So feel free to join in. And feel free to join in. And there's always one thing we always like to talk about, especially as we come up towards the last couple seconds of the show. And what is that thing, Russ?
Please create an incident response plan and a threat model.
Yes. And that was what I was going to say as well is, hey, start with a threat model, go to an incident response plan, rinse and repeat, because it's almost like Ouroboros, right? It's just eating itself. That's how it works.
Yeah.
It all starts from there. So definitely do that, have fun, and also keep building up those experience points, because every 1 XP point helps you to level up at some point, either your security mind or your documentation or personnel. So until next time, have a great day and happy Monday. Take care. All right. Have a good one.